Okay, I see people coming in now. I guess I'll start when we get to 20, just because I like the number. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Greetings. If you are here for the, three questions, the three most important questions to finding product market fit, you are at the right place. My name is Habib Bangura, and on the screen next to me is Daniel Yoo. He's going to be the one delivering the webinar today. I just wanted, as the new CEO of Project FoundED, I just wanted to greet everyone, welcome you to this space. I suspect that most of you are already familiar with the work that we do, but I'll just in case we have folks who are new to our work, I'll say a little bit about Project FoundED, and then I'll kick it off to to Daniel, who will be with you all the rest of the way. So just a little bit about Project FoundED for those of you who don't know. We are a nonprofit that essentially is focused on bringing equity or accelerating educational equity in the digital age. That's how I like to talk about it. So if EdTech is an indispensable part of the new digital learning, the new education landscape, then we feel like it's really important that we have a focus on equity in an EdTech space. And as we all may know, that's not the focus currently, right? So what we are doing right now is to work with folks in the ecosystem to try to redirect or reorient our focus towards equity and outcome for young people, which again is why you all founded the companies that you have founded. And part of the way that we do so is to provide entrepreneurs with the information, the networking and resources that you all will need to help accelerate and grow your company so that the awesome products that you're creating are reaching the hands of any student and every student who needs it, not just those who have the financial means to be able to access it, right? So a part of doing that is getting your product into the hands of the right people. Daniel is someone who has expertise in that space as a founder of Goalbook and someone who's walked that journey before. And he has a lot of insights that he's going to be sharing with you. And hope you enjoy, hope you gain a lot from this. All right.
Thank you, Habib. Thanks everyone for joining. And it's great to meet you and great to work with Project FoundED, and appreciate your focus and the organization's focus on creating a more equitable school system. It's certainly something that motivates us at Goalbook, but also something that motivates us at Long-Term Impact and finding other founders and other companies that are working towards that end. It will take a group effort, of course, to make progress. So glad to be a part of this, and thanks for hosting me. I'll share my screen now, everyone, and just a couple of questions. I believe this will be recorded, and then also the slides should be accessible to everybody. Let me see if I can chat them. I can chat them in the link during our first kind of break, and then you should be able to access them on Google Slides as well. All right. Well, the talk I wanted to share a little bit today, and hopefully be helpful to you, is what I believe are the three most important questions when you're trying to find product sales fit as an early stage EdTech startup. It's not easy to do, and I guess I'll give a caveat in the beginning that what I'll share here, and I believe what anyone will share around this kind of question, is there's no guarantee of success. But I hope what you'll find is that these are helpful and will accelerate your own learning as you're trying to find a product sales fit in the EdTech space. So a couple goals for the session today. One is, I hope after this session, you'll feel like you'll be able to focus your efforts into the highest leverage learnings of finding product sales fit. I also hope you'll walk away with one or two actionable tips that you feel like you can apply immediately after as you try to seek product sales fit. So from the get-go, I'll give you the punchline at the very beginning, which is I believe these are the three most important questions. And we'll be going through these throughout the session today. So they are, one, who is my most likely buyer? The second is what keeps them up at night? And the third is how quickly do they make the connection? I'll elaborate on each of these as we go through the session today. So here's what we'll do. I'll share just a brief intro of myself, then a brief definition of product sales fit, since that's the overall goal for the questions we're looking at today. Then I'll share a little bit about each of those three questions, and then one final thought, and hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. I'm also going to try to pay attention to the chat window too. Oh, and thank you, Amy, for sharing out the slides for today. If you have any chat messages or any questions you want to throw in the chat, I'll try to pay attention to those. Feel free to send those in anytime. All right, so a little bit about me. I was a special education teacher as well as a district special education coordinator in Ravenswood City School District, which is in the community of East Palo Alto and East Menlo Park here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Then I founded a company called Goalbook. That was in 2011, and I still lead Goalbook today. We're getting close to now about 80 employees, and we work with over 700 school districts. Our primary work is supporting special educators and specialists, such as speech therapists or occupational therapists. And then last year, me, my co-founder Justin, and my friend Jason, who's also an EdTech entrepreneur, we started Long-Term Impact, which is a pre-seed EdTech investment fund, which hopefully I'll share a little bit more about at the end of the session today. So hopefully some of the things that I'll share and what kind of informs the content of this talk are both things that we learned mostly the hard way through Goalbook, and I'll share some of those learnings throughout the session, as well as the various early stage founders, companies that I've been able to meet and interact with through Long-Term Impact. So those are kind of like the context in which I'll share these learnings. All right, first, let's first talk about what is product sales fit. So Y Combinator, the famous accelerator, has a motto, which is make something people want. To me, it's the most simplest and clearest definition of product market fit, something that we're all supposed to be doing, especially at an early stage, is trying to figure out how to make something people want. Sounds simple, but as you all know, it can be very difficult. And product sales fit, to me, comes from this fact in most EdTech companies that the people that you're making something for are actually two different groups of people. First group is that there's users, the people who benefit in some way from directly using your product. And then there's another group of people, which is buyers. These are the people who are actually going to pay for your product. So you might want to think a little bit about the product or service you're making now. And my guess is that these two groups of people are very different. For example, if it's like a mobile educational game, your users might be students who you want to make the game fun and engaging and of course support their learning. But most likely the students or the children aren't going to be the ones that make the purchase of that app. It's going to perhaps be their parents or caretakers or even the school they attend that's going to be the buyer. And so now there's these two very different groups. And I found it helpful to think about product market fit in kind of two halves. One half is product user fit. You're trying to figure out, is this product something that the users really want to use? But you also need to focus on the other half, which is is this product something that buyers actually want to buy? What I found so far in my experience in long-term impact, where we're meeting early stage EdTech founders, is that they've primarily been focused on the left half of this slide, trying to make sure that their product is something that the users want to use. And they haven't been as focused on the right-hand side of the slide, finding product sales fit, trying to figure out how to make something that buyers want to buy. And that's what I hope these three questions will help in terms of your journey on the right-hand side of the slide. So just to recap, what is product sales fit? It's when we've successfully reached a point where we can say that we've made something that buyers want. We've made something that buyers want to buy. All right, now let's go to what I believe are the three most important questions when you're trying to find product sales fit. So here they are again. First question is, who is my most likely buyer? Second is, what keeps them up at night? And the third is, how quickly do they make the connection? Okay, so let's look at the first one. Who is my most likely buyer? So when I go through these questions, I'll share kind of three different subcomponents around each question. I'll share kind of a story that informs my learning around this in my own journey at Goalbook. Then I'll share like a mental model or a framework that I hope will be helpful when you think about your own startup and your own journey as a founder. And then some quick tips as well, and also some product misfit questions that may distract you or may lead you astray when you're trying to find product sales fit. Okay, so who is my most likely buyer? A little bit of what I learned here through my journey with Goalbook. So when we built the very first MVP of our current product, Goalbook Toolkit, we kind of had like a pricing page and many arguments about who should be the buyer that we target. And we actually were sitting with three different seemingly viable options. We had a teacher membership, which we thought maybe about $49 a month. We were just guessing, but that seemed like a reasonable price. Then we had a school level membership if you're in an individual school. And we initially thought that, okay, a few $1,000s a year maybe. And then we had a district membership, which at that time we had no idea what we could charge with that. And then we could sell, to a much larger institution with a much larger price. And of course, there was a different buyer at the end of these three different options. So for the teacher membership, our buyer was a special education teacher. At a school, it would have been the principal. And at the district, it would have been the special education director. In hindsight, there's an obvious answer to this question, but when we were in the moment, this was actually a real debate. And so here's the learning process we went through to find out who our most likely buyer for our product would be. We learned that for teachers, there was a low price that they put on the product. And we learned that mainly because they were mostly paying for convenience. This was just something that was going to save them a little bit of time. And the value they put on that wasn't that high. And of course, we also knew that an individual teacher, whether they're paying out of pocket, whether their principal is paying or the school is paying for them, just has a limited budget to work with. Well, then we talked to school principals. Is there something that could be bought at a school level? And what we learned there is that most principals didn't feel empowered to make special education programming decisions. Many of them were actually afraid. They were worried that if they did something wrong here, that they would be in trouble with the district or in trouble with the parents. And so this didn't feel like a good most likely buyer for us because most didn't feel that this was a realm in which they had decision-making power, even if they had budget and even if they liked what the product did. So finally, we landed on special education directors. They have budget, and they were the one that most understood the institutional benefits of the tool. So beyond an individual teacher saving time, why was it important for the district? And what was really on the line, or what were the strategic priorities at the district level that made our product worth buying and training all their teachers on? So this is kind of a very short, condensed part of how we were answering this question at Goalbook. And it took us some time to figure out. In hindsight, it sounds so obvious, but going in the forward direction, there was a lot of learning and missteps that we made here. Okay, so that's a little bit about kind of how we found out who our most likely buyer was at Goalbook. Now, a framework that might be helpful as you're thinking about your own startup. So this is a very common framework. You may have seen this before. It's called the diffusion of innovation. It's essentially an adoption curve of any kind of new technology or new innovation. And the main thing that I want to point out about this curve is that the early adopters and innovators are on the far left side of this curve. And your most likely buyers are the ones that are going to be in this 2.5% of the general population of buyers you can sell to. And so that's why, for me, the most likely part of this question is very important, is not figuring out who everyone under this curve could be, but really trying to be sharp about who might be in this 2.5% when you're just getting started and just trying to start making your first revenue or making your first sales. It's not a big group. So there's a lot of learning that's probably in front of you about taking what might be a broad view of your buyer, like something like just saying like directors or principals or parents, and really figuring out what's the 2.5% within those big groups that make them a very likely buyer for your product or service. So here are some quick tips on how you might be learning or what you might learn about who's in that 2.5% group of your most likely buyer. So one might be their job title or their role, or we found it to be valuable even like specific mindset they might have in doing that role. So one example is that, okay, special education directors, that was our buyer, but who's in that 2.5%? We realized that there's kind of this dichotomy of directors. Some of them approached IEP development, special education programming very much in a compliance-oriented way. We need to do this right so we don't get in trouble. And then there were others, and they were actually the minority, who viewed it as an instructional practice. We need to do all these things so that our students have a better instructional outcome. And those were actually the people that had the mindset who were more open to buying our product than the compliance-oriented folks. And so this is just another kind of attribute we learned of who is in that 2.5% of this broad curve of special education directors. Another is the person's specific either budget they control, the personnel they have leadership over, the resources that they have under them, and their specific responsibilities. So these are other attributes that you can be learning about that may influence who is in that innovator or early adopter category for your product or service. And then finally, this is a very, very important thing, is what is the organizational or situational context the buyer is in that makes them most likely to buy your product. For us, there were a couple things that we found were strong indicators that put them in this early adopter category. One is that when there was that big transition to Common Core, when we were just starting out, that their district had a specifically defined special education initiative as a part of that transition. that means that there was something the director was responsible for and had to show an answer to. If they didn't have that, then there was that didn't put them in our very innovator and early adopter category. They were less likely to buy our product. All right, now some things that I've noticed are what I call maybe product sales misfit questions. Questions that may seem obviously not correct, but oftentimes the way we act as founders suggests that these are the questions that we're actually trying to answer, not who is my most likely buyer. Okay, so one, I may have mentioned this a little bit already, is who are all my potential buyers? So sometimes I meet founders and of course, they're very enthusiastic about what they're doing, clearly very passionate. And I ask them, well, who is going to buy this? And the enthusiasm kind of spills over into like, well, these people can buy it for this reason, and these people can buy it for this reason, and these people can buy it. And clearly they've put a lot of time and energy in basically telling me they've identified or they have a theory or a hypothesis of this entire curve. Like every single segment they mentioned, you can probably put somewhere in this area. And that might be exciting, and that might show that there's a big potential for the product as it grows. But when you're trying to find product sales fit, what you really need to find are the most likely buyers. You can't focus on the whole market, especially as a small organization. So it's really important to learn, okay, cool. There's all these people who you think could be interested. Which of those groups and what about each of those groups makes them either more likely to buy or less likely to buy? Okay, here's another misfit question that I've encountered, which is the most likely buyer is the very first buyer of the product. This can be true. And actually, who are the first customers that you have is actually a pretty good indicator of who might be most ready or needing or have the attributes that make them your most likely buyer. But there'll be something that you'll encounter as you're learning about product sales fit. And that is that any individual sale can potentially come from anywhere on this curve. And so it's possible that that very first customer might actually be in, let's say, the late majority segment. And it doesn't mean that you can't get sales anywhere across this curve when you're very small and just starting out. But what you're trying to learn is where am I most likely to get sales? So here in this graphic, I tried to illustrate like this phenomenon you'll encounter, which is that you can get some false positives. You can get sales from segments that in hindsight won't be your most likely buyer. And you'll get false negatives in the sense that you'll get rejections from people who actually are in your innovator category. They are in your most likely buyer segment. Most likely buyer doesn't mean that if they have all the attributes, they're 100% going to buy. It just means that that's the group you want to focus on because they have the highest probability of buying than any other group that you've identified. Okay, so I thought this is a good time to just take a brief pause and reflect on that first question. This is also a great time to chat any clarifying questions or other questions in, or any comments you have if you have a similar or different perspective. It's just to think about, what have you learned in your own startup about the question, who is my most likely buyer? What have you learned about that for your product or service? What do you feel like you need to learn next about that question, about who your most likely buyer is? And then is there anything you realize that you want to either need to do or stop doing in order to learn about who your most likely buyer is? So I'll just pause for a minute or so just for you to reflect on these questions, and feel free to chat anything in. All right, really great questions, everyone. I don't think I thank you for submitting them. I'll try to synthesize and summarize a little bit. So it is a learning process. So when you're product sales fit, it is definitely a learning process. You are trying to sell, but you're trying to learn through every sales interaction that you have. And so it's not clear at first which are the false positives and which are the false negatives. So I have no formula here. And I think Alan asked this question, but what I would recommend is just to try to keep your learning perspective on what are the different conversations, what are the reactions of people. Maybe you're making some early sales. What is that teaching you about who might be your most likely buyer? So I would just say, it can't be everybody, and just what are you getting in terms of who that focus might be. And then there's a great question on how does this, how does this relate to product development? And so to me, what you want, once you start to get a feeling of who your most likely buyer is, you just want to make sure that you prioritize that segment. So, I kind of have a little bit of an extreme view, which is like, don't even worry about anyone else at that point. But, you don't need to have like zero tolerance to any kind of future thought. You just want to make sure that's your first priority, because if you can't get them, then it's very unlikely you're going to get anyone else. So you want to try to win first and then figure out the rest, and not make your life too complicated by trying to win every segment at the same time. All right, cool. If I didn't address your question, or maybe you're not satisfied how I addressed that question, hopefully we'll have time at the end for a little bit more QA as well. Okay, so we talked about that first question, who is my most likely buyer? Now let's talk about the second question, which is what keeps them up at night? Okay, so a little bit of my experience Goalbook with this learning through the second question. So brief history, we founded the company in 2011. In 2012, we closed a seed round, just under $1 million. And not too long after that, we pivoted. And I felt a little bad because, we raised money on product A, and then not too long after we actually closed the round, here we are like pivoting to product B. But in hindsight, it was a good decision. And I want to share a little bit about why we decided to make this pivot and why I believe it was the right decision to make. So our first product was an IEP team collaboration product. It was like a private social network around the student with an IEP. I still love this idea, by the way, but in 2011, when we were trying to sell this product, we just ran in, without going into all the gory details, it just wasn't sticking. People would agree that this would be a helpful tool, but it just didn't feel like it was something that any level of person, teacher, director, really felt like they needed at the time. So me and my co-founder, we were definitely getting frustrated. We're getting frustrated at each other. And it was a difficult time in this very fledgling stage. So I went to a couple conferences for directors of special education at the time. And the big thing that was happening was this transition to Common Core in most of the states across the country. And what I noticed at this conference is that any session that mentioned the words Common Core and IEP in the session title had standing room only crowds of directors, like I could hardly get in. There was panic in the room, like you could just feel that people were stressed out about this. And even then, it didn't really connect with me, but I sat down at this conference, I was like eating lunch, and I was like, I was talking to myself, and I was like, Daniel, what are you doing? Like, you're trying to convince people that they have this problem around IEP collaboration. And yet here you are, like in a place where they're telling you like, this is our problem. And instead of trying to get all of them over to me, like maybe I should just move over to where they are. Like maybe I should just move to the problem that they have and not trying to convince everyone they have the problem I think I have. And so this was kind of the big self-reflection that allowed me to kind of let go of that original idea that I was really passionate about and really go to what the pain and urgency and importance was in our buyers' minds. Oh, Jeremy, thanks for that endorsement. I haven't totally given up on that idea yet. It may come back at some point. All right, so why is this? So here's a little bit of a framework of how to kind of think about your buyer and the problem that you believe they have and that you believe you're addressing. And what as you're listening to this, you might want to just run through that problem, try to take the mind of the buyer, run through that problem through what is often called the Eisenhower matrix. Again, something you might be familiar with already. So the Eisenhower matrix is not a startup thing. It's kind of a leadership thing. It's a framework of how leaders should prioritize their own time and decision-making. And it's basically a 2x2 matrix. On one axis is important. How important is the issue or the problem? And on the other axis is how urgent that issue or problem is. Is it very urgent or is it not urgent at all? And whether your buyer is familiar with the Eisenhower matrix or not, my belief is that this kind of 2x2 calculus is probably going on in their mind, which is the problem are the problems that I have, are they important and are they urgent? And you can see in the Eisenhower matrix, a leader should definitely focus their time and energy on things that are both important and urgent. And any other combination, the leader is trying to get out of doing it. And this is actually what can work against us when we're presenting our product or service to a buyer, is they're running through what we present in this Eisenhower matrix, whether they know about it or not. And that's what I mean when behind this question of what keeps them up at night. Do you know the problems of your buyer that are in that upper left box? Whether or not you're solving them or not is not really the scope of this particular question. It's just, do you know what they are? So for example, going back to my Goalbook story, like I didn't really know or accept what was in the upper left quadrant of my buyer as directors of special education at that time. Everything up there was like related to the Common Core. And meanwhile, I was in probably one of these other three boxes trying to convince them how important or urgent this thing was, and it really wasn't, at least to them. So the reason why I phrase the question of what keeps them up at night is, to me, it kind of gives the right color or flavor of the problem you want to be able to align your product or service to. It's something that they genuinely feel has both, it's very important either to them or to the institution, and it's something they feel like they have to do soon. So this upper left box. Yeah, so this is where we want to be when we're trying to find product sales fit, is working, helping them with a problem they believe they have that they believe is both urgent and important. All right, so here are some tips, some characteristics of important and urgent problems. One is that when you're talking with your buyer, they know that this problem is felt by the institution. Somehow the institution is suffering because of this problem. And they are personally also suffering because of this problem somehow. So it could be because they're being held accountable to solving this problem. It could be that there's a high level priority that the whole institution has deemed is important. But I think it's really important that the ideal important and urgent problems for most buyers are both felt at the institution and by that person individually. Another characteristic of important and urgent problems is that time, money, human capital, just any kind of resource is already being spent to try to solve it, and not well. So they're both spending resource and there's a collective consciousness that it's not really working. The last one, and this is one of the ones that I reflect on in my own experience at Goalbook, is that usually important and urgent problems feel like they're new problems rather than they're old problems. So taking it back to the Goalbook story, IEP collaboration, keeping the team in touch, that's a problem that's existed for a very long time. Common Core, that's new. Okay. And this just says something about human nature, which I won't say I know what that is, that usually you don't get urgency from old problems. You usually get urgency from something that at least feels like it's a newer problem. Okay, some potential misfit questions here about what keeps them up at night. I should say, by the way, a lot of these questions come from reflecting on my own experience. Like I've made all these and more. Okay, first question. What problem do they intellectually assent to having? And I thought I would win in a sales interaction or in an interaction with my buyer if I could get them just to agree that what I'm saying is a problem. That's a trap. There's two things probably wrong here if this is kind of how we're approaching this question, what keeps them up at night, one is that the things that keep us up at night, we're already aware of. We know what they are. They shouldn't have to take someone educating us that we have them. The second one is that this is not personally felt, right? You may get intellectual agreement. Yeah, that's happening in our district, but important and urgent problems are also felt personally by your buyer, not just something that they agree is happening in the world or in their local context, like their school or their district. So don't settle when you're learning about this question. Don't settle for just mere intellectual assent. All right, so yeah, basically, most likely, this is where the buyer is placing you and your product, right? It's like, maybe it's important. Yeah, it's something true in the world, but I don't feel any urgency around doing anything about it. Okay, another one. is what problem do they find annoying or inconvenient? Sometimes I get this impression when I'm talking to founders who are presenting their product or service. And they have something that they believe is an improvement. And I also think it's an improvement. The general problem is when it comes to product sales fit is that just a delta improvement is usually not enough to make a sale. Usually the improvement is not the problem. And so even if someone knows that you're helping, knows that you're supporting something that could be improved, that's generally not enough. And so again, that's kind of why I try to capture this question as like, what keeps them up at night? Like, it can't just be annoying. It can't just be inconvenient usually. It needs to be one of the top things that are genuinely worrying them and worrying their organization. So a lot of these fall into the not important. Yeah, I got to brush my teeth, but it's not super important how I do that, right? There are a lot of things in the lives of your buyer that they may have to do. They may even have to do tomorrow, but they may not feel super important to them. Okay, another product misfit question. I made a lot of mistakes here, as you can tell. What problem can I convince them they have? This was kind of me with that first version of Goalbook's product, the private social network. I was just trying my best to be as persuasive as I could that collaboration was a real issue, and I experienced it as a teacher, and here's are the things that are happening. And if you have to convince them of the problem itself, not your solution, then most likely you're in this quadrant, which is it may not even be something important nor urgent for them if you're finding that you have to do this too much. Okay, so that's a little bit about the second question, what keeps them up at night. And oh, sorry, I think I skipped a slide here. I thought maybe we'll just take a minute or so, kind of pause here, have you kind of reflect about your own startup and your own journey of product sales fit. What do you know already about what keeps your buyer up at night? What's something that you feel like you need to learn next about this question? And is there anything you want to do or not want to do in trying to learn about this question? Also, if you have any other questions related to this, feel free to check them in. All right, thanks for sharing in the Q&A and in the chat. There's a question here about how do you determine, like let's say ahead of a sales call or you're about to go to a conference, what the customer problems might be, what might be the things that keep them up at night. So the two most concrete suggestions I can give here, which sometimes I don't see people do. One is you can research the institution or even research them. You can find like what the strategic priorities are for the district. What are some new initiatives they have? Usually behind a lot of those new initiatives or the strategic priorities are problems that have arose that they're trying to improve or do better in. The other one, which may even be more important, is when you meet them, ask them. Try to listen first. Try to ask questions that get them to share with you what are the things that are keeping them up at night. I wouldn't use that exact question itself. It might feel too vulnerable or too for them, at least at first, until you get to know them better, but try to get that information from them. There was a couple of questions about oftentimes we might meet buyers and we know that they have the problem and they feel it, but they may not be able to express it. And so that's a perfect segue to what we'll talk about next. Okay, I have to go a little bit quickly here because I know we're reaching the end of time, but the product we pivoted to is called Goalbook Toolkit. And you don't need to know everything about how it works. I just put this slide here because we learned that we could demo the product in literally one screen and one click. The core of this product was goals at different levels of access for the same Common Core standard. And in hindsight, it's obvious, but it took us a while to get to this point where this was the key thing that was going to connect the problem that our buyer had to our solution. And so we would literally just pull up this one page and we use the same goal every single time. And we would just click one of these tabs and show that it's the same. The goal is the same, but it's also not the same. And once the light bulbs went on, then we knew we were going to at least get the next meeting, even if we weren't sure if we were going to get the ultimate sale. Okay. And so that to me is like the learning about this third question, which is how quickly are you able to get to connect the buyer with their problem and your solution? How fast and how efficiently are you able to make that connection? And in my opinion, this might be controversial, is that I think it's a lot more generative for your learning of product sales fit to try to optimize for the speed of this connection. That's why I phrase the question, how quickly do they make the connection? Then the depth of the connection, how much they understand about how your solution solves their problem. Both, of course, are important, but I think it's actually more important to first try to orient your learning about making this connection as quickly as you can in the buyer's mind. Okay, so very simple framework that we all know, problem, solution. And so it's in the mind of the buyer, how quickly are they able to connect what your solution is to the problem that keeps them up at night? And just some quick tips of how to learn how to make a quicker connection. One is related to some of the questions that came in the QA is, are you able to state their problem more clearly and concisely than they can? When in the early stage of sales, like it took me a while to talk to enough people to where I saw a pattern and then I could kind of state that pattern very concisely in a way they could relate to. And oftentimes a reaction I would get when I would say that is like a reaction of like identifying with what I just said. So they're like, that's us. Or like, how did you know that that's what's going on, right? And so that was kind of evidence, like learning evidence for me that I was able to understand and diagnose their problem very quickly and very efficiently. then of course, the other side of that is, are you able to communicate the essence of your solution in a single sentence, screen, or action? I'm not saying here that you're never going to find product sales fit unless you can show your product in a single screen. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm hoping I'm trying to communicate is that if you pursue this quest of trying to state the problem concisely, try to hone your demo down to what you think is going to communicate the essence of your solution, that will cause you to learn about your buyer and their mentality and how to make this connection happen in their mind faster and faster. So some common misfit questions here. So oftentimes I'll get demos of products as a potential investor, or just as someone that people go to if they want any advice or a perspective. And I get taken through everything from signing in and creating an account and all these other things. For me, it's fine, but the buyer generally isn't going to make that connection very quickly for that. And so a demo like that really is answering a different question in my view, which is how comprehensively and deeply do they understand and appreciate my product? Of course, we want people to understand everything we built and all the hard work and thoughtfulness we put into it. But that's not the question. The question is, how quickly can we, as a salesperson, help them make the connection between those two things? So doing this is like when you're talking with your buyer, it's like basically spending all your time talking about everything about your solution. Hard for them to make the connection in that case. Another one that can fall into is that when we don't actually try to learn about how to make it concise, we're satisfied with just they get it eventually. And that kind of may look like this. Eventually, with enough conversations or with a long enough meeting, they can finally get to the solution. This is what the beginning is going to look like. But don't be satisfied with this, right? Keep learning. If you're finding that this is what's happening, there's probably more for you to learn how to make this connection faster. Okay. For sake of time, we'll skip this time of reflection, and I'll just recap real quick and share one last thought, and then maybe if there's any final questions, we can take some of those. So again, these are the three most important questions I believe as you're learning how to find product sales fit. Who's my most likely buyer? What keeps them up at night? And how quickly do they make the connection between their problem and your solution? Final thought. I personally have found the founder journey to also be one of just personal development. And one way I could summarize everything I just shared is really stated in a product kind of misfit question, which is, am I doing all these activities with the real goal of people liking me or approving of what I do or getting positive validation of my product, rather than actually finding a product sales fit or ultimately product market fit? So this is just a final thought that I'll leave you. And in my own journey, I reflected on a lot of the things I did that weren't ideal were really driven by my desire for approval of everyone I was talking to, and not really to finding out the truth of who my most likely buyers are, their problems, and how to best help them make that connection. And I'll say, you can do it. But it is challenging, but definitely you as founders are in the best position to figure out these questions for your product and the areas that you are passionate about. This is a little bit about long-term impact. I welcome you to check out the website. My colleague and co-founder Jason is on the call too, so definitely reach out to us after. And then lastly, just take any questions or last thoughts before I hand things back to Habib. Thank you, everybody.
All right. So as the questions come in, thank you so much, Daniel, for this. This has been so informative, even for me. I'm definitely leaving with the Eisenhower matrix. Probably going to put something up on my wall just to help me with that. Yeah, we really appreciate you doing this. I think we're all the wiser for all the mistakes that you have made and learned from Jason. I appreciate that. Just a few quick things from us. One, just a reminder to everyone that this was a recorded session, and it will be posted in our resource hub at projectfounded.org. So if you want to go just review the video, review learning, you can find it on our website pretty soon. Again, listen, look out for more events from us. This is, again, part of our mission. Part of our mission is to ensure that mission-aligned EdTech companies like yours are able to get your products in front of the kids who need it the most. So we will be hosting events like these from founders like Daniel and Jason and folks who've gone through the gauntlet that you all are going through now and have wisdom to pass on to help you all accelerate your growth. So keep on the lookout for that. Please join our community so that you can be notified and up to date on all the events that we'll be hosting and other opportunities that we'll be posting on our newsletter and things like that. And also for me, we will be sending out a survey at some point just to learn from you all what your needs are what your learning needs are specifically, and what your support needs are, because again, we want to be able to continue to provide valuable supports for you all. So be on the lookout for a survey that should go out at some point. Again, I'll hand it over to Jason if you have the time to get to folks' questions. Thank you everyone for showing up.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Habib, for having me and long-term impact here. And I hope also feel free to circulate our contact information as well. I'm just Daniel at longtermimpact.fund, and Jason is just Jason at longtermimpact.fund if anyone wants to talk after the session today.